Sable had not planned on singing tonight. She had not planned on being in the great hall at all. But the universe, it seemed, had a vicious sense of humor, because here she stood in a borrowed dress that did not fit properly, surrounded by 600 guests who had come to celebrate the king choosing someone else. The rejection was still fresh. 3 hours old if she was counting, and she was. Every second of it carved into her like a wound that had not yet decided whether to bleed or burn. Prince Cedrin of the Western Reaches had presented her to the court that morning as his intended bride. By noon, King Thalric Vane had looked at her once, turned to his council, and said, "Send her back." 3 words. He had not even used her name. The hall had erupted in whispers. Cedrin's face had gone white, then red, then a dangerous shade of purple that matched his father's banner. The alliance between the Western Reaches and the Crown had been built on this marriage. On her. And in 3 words, the Alpha King had demolished it like it meant nothing. Because she meant nothing. And now, hours later, while the court celebrated the king's decision to entertain other candidates, while women in gowns worth more than Sable's entire life paraded through the hall hoping to catch his eye, Sable stood pressed against a stone pillar near the musicians and tried very hard to disappear. She should have left. Cedrin had told her to leave, had practically spat the words at her before vanishing into the crowd to salvage what remained of his dignity. But leaving required walking the full length of the great hall in front of everyone, and Sable could not bring herself to do it. Not with 600 pairs of eyes ready to watch the rejected bride slink away like a dog dismissed from the table. So she stayed. Invisible, she hoped. The musicians beside her were playing something bright and celebratory, a reel that had half the court on their feet. A lute player fumbled a chord change badly enough that Sable winced. The vocalist, a slender woman in green silk, was struggling with the high passage of the 3rd verse. Her pitch wobbled, cracked, and the notes scattered like dropped glass. Sable closed her eyes. Without thinking, without deciding, her lips moved. She sang the line under her breath, barely louder than an exhale. The correct melody, the true pitch. The words shaped with an effortlessness that came from somewhere she had never been able to explain. It was a reflex, the way some people cracked their knuckles or tapped their fingers. She heard a wrong note, and her body fixed it. She had always been this way. She did not realize the music had stopped. When she opened her eyes, the vocalist was staring at her. The lute player had gone still, his fingers frozen on the strings. 2 of the nearest tables had turned, guests mid-conversation with their mouths still open. And standing less than 10 feet away, a goblet of wine held loosely in one hand, was King Thalric Vane. He was looking directly at her. Sable's stomach dropped through the floor. The Alpha King was enormous up close, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested violence was not something he performed, but something he simply was. His dark eyes, nearly black in the low firelight, pinned her to the pillar like a blade through cloth. "Can you sing?" he asked. The question was so plain, so ordinary, that for a moment Sable could not process it. The king of the realm, the man who had rejected her as a bride 3 hours ago without learning her name, was asking her if she could sing. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to say no, to curtsy, to apologize, to become invisible again. But something else answered. Something stubborn and wounded and furious that lived in the part of her chest where the rejection still burned. "Yes," Sable said. "Then sing," the king said. The hall had gone quiet. 600 people, silent, staring. The weight of their attention pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Sable opened her mouth, and she sang. The first note left her throat and the air in the great hall changed. It was not a trick. It was not a performance. The sound that poured out of her was something older than music, deeper than melody, a resonance that vibrated in the stone beneath their feet, that pressed against the skin and sank inward. She sang an old hymn, a lullaby from the borderlands that her mother had sung before she died, or so she had been told. She did not remember her mother. She only remembered the song. The second verse hit, and a woman at the nearest table set down her glass with trembling hands. A guardsman by the door blinked rapidly, his jaw tight. The lute player's eyes were wet. And King Thalric Vane, the most feared alpha in the known world, took one step backward. His goblet slipped from his fingers. Wine spread across the stone floor like a slow wound, and he did not notice. His pupils had blown wide, his lips slightly parted, and the hand at his side had begun to tremble. Sable finished the song. The last note hung in the air for 3 full seconds before fading into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The great hall was so quiet she could hear the candle flames flickering. Then the king turned on his heel and walked out. The doors slammed behind him. The sound broke the spell, and the hall erupted into chaos. But Sable just stood there, her heart hammering, her hands shaking, staring at the wine stain on the floor and the empty space where the most powerful man in the kingdom had been standing before her voice made him flee. She did not understand what had just happened. But the look on his face, right before he turned away, had not been anger. It had been fear. And that terrified her more than anything. The summons came at dawn. Sable had not slept. She had returned to the narrow guest chamber assigned to rejected brides, which was apparently a room that existed in this palace, and spent the night sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, waiting for something terrible to happen. Every footstep in the corridor made her flinch. Every distant door closing sounded like a verdict. She had dreamed, briefly, of being dragged before the court and sentenced for crimes against the crown. Specifically, for making the king flee his own celebration. And she was not even a particularly good singer, the executioner had said in the dream, which felt unnecessarily personal. When the knock finally came, she opened the door to find a tall, angular man with pale gray eyes and the bearing of someone who had never once been caught off guard by anything in his life. "Miss Sable," he said, "I am Fenwick. I serve as the king's chancellor." Sable studied his face for any indication of whether she was about to be imprisoned, exiled, or executed. His expression gave her nothing, not a flicker. "The king requests your presence in the East Gallery, if you would follow me." It was not a question. Sable followed. The East Gallery was a long, cold room with tall windows that let in the sharp gray light of early morning. Portraits of dead monarchs lined the walls, their painted eyes following her as she walked. At the far end, King Thalric stood with his back to her, looking out at the courtyard below. He did not turn when she entered. Did not acknowledge the click of the door closing behind her. Sable stopped 20 paces from him and waited. Her pulse was a frantic drumming thing in her wrists and throat. "Do you know what you did last night?" the king asked without turning around. "I sang, Your Majesty," Sable replied carefully. "You did more than sing." He turned. The morning light hit his face, and he looked worse than he had the night before. The skin beneath his eyes was bruised with exhaustion. His hands, those enormous scarred hands, were gripping the window ledge behind him like it was the only thing holding him upright. "How long have you been able to do that?" he asked. "Do what, Your Majesty?" "Don't be coy. The thing your voice does." "How long?" "Always," she said. "Since I was a child. I do not know why it happens." He released the window ledge and crossed his arms over his chest. The posture should have looked casual. Instead, it looked like a man building a wall. "Last night, after you sang, I slept," he said. The words came out flat, clinical. 14 minutes. That does not sound like much, but I want you to understand something. He paused. "I have not slept in 11 months. The words landed in the cold gallery like stones dropped into still water. 11 months. That was not a sleep problem. That was a death sentence. The healers, the herbalists, the apothecaries, Thalric continued. I have tried everything available to the crown. Nothing has worked. Last night was the first time in nearly a year that my mind went quiet long enough for sleep to find me. He looked at her, and there was something raw behind the controlled mask. Whatever your voice does, it reached something nothing else has been able to touch. Sable did not know what to say. She was a rejected bride in a borrowed dress that did not fit, being told by the king who had discarded her that her voice had done the impossible. Your Majesty, I do not understand what you are asking me, she said. I am asking you to stay. The irony was so sharp it nearly drew blood. 3 words this morning, 3 words yesterday. Yesterday, send her back. Today, asking her to stay. Fenwick stepped forward from somewhere behind her. What His Majesty is proposing is a formal arrangement. You would remain at court as a consultant to the crown. Each evening, you would attend the king's private study and sing for a period of no less than 1 hour. In exchange, you would receive quarters, a stipend, and the full protection of the crown. And if I refuse? Sable asked. The silence that followed was just long enough to be an answer. Prince Cedrin departed the palace this morning, Fenwick said. He has formally rescinded your betrothal contract. You have no house to return to, no family holdings, no standing. I say this not as a threat, but as a practicality. Cedrin had left her. Of course he had. She was damaged goods now, a bride the king had rejected publicly. She had nowhere to go. I will stay, she said, because there was nothing else to say. The king nodded once. He turned back to the window. Fenwick will arrange everything. You begin tonight. Sable was almost at the door when his voice stopped her. The song you sang last night, Thalric said, still facing the window. What was it called? I do not know its name, Your Majesty. My mother used to sing it. She died when I was young. Another silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, the king said, My mother sang it too. The door closed behind her. Sable stood in the corridor, her back against the cold stone, and pressed a hand to her chest where something had begun to ache in a way she could not name. Tonight, she would sing for a king who could not sleep. A king who had thrown her away and then asked her to stay. A king whose mother had known the same lullaby as hers. And she had the terrible, creeping feeling that she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than a marriage. The king's private study was smaller than Sable had expected. No grand throne, no sweeping banners, just a room lined with shelves of leather-bound reports and maps pinned to the walls with iron tacks. A single fire burned in the hearth. A straight-backed wooden chair had been placed near the far wall. For her, clearly. When Thalric entered, he did not look at her. He crossed to the desk, sat down, pulled a stack of correspondence toward him, and began reading. Should I begin, Your Majesty? When I say, he replied without looking up. Minutes passed. The fire popped. Finally he said, Now. Sable sang. She chose something simple, a folk melody from the eastern valleys. She kept her voice low and even, unsure of the boundaries. Within 5 minutes, the scratching of his pen slowed. Within 8, it stopped. His head dipped forward an inch, caught itself, dipped again. His breathing changed, deepened. His eyes closed. His forehead came to rest on his folded arms, and he was gone. Sable let the song trail off and sat very still. Without the permanent tension in his jaw, without the controlled blankness he wore like armor, he looked younger, hollowed out. She noticed a scar that ran from below his left ear and disappeared beneath his collar. The white-knuckle grip he still held on his pen, even in sleep, like some part of him refused to let go. 20 minutes passed, then 30. A door opened behind her. Fenwick entered, took one look at the sleeping king, and stopped dead. His composed expression cracked into something painfully close to relief. He mouthed the words, "Do not leave." An hour passed. When Thalric finally stirred, his head snapped up, his body rigid with the instinct of a man who had trained himself to wake ready to fight. His eyes swept the room and landed on her. The tips of his ears went red. He straightened in his chair with deliberate precision. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Just over an hour, Your Majesty." "You may go," he said. Sable paused at the door. "Your Majesty, you have ink on your face." From the report. He touched his cheek, found the smudge, and stared at his fingertips. "Good night, Miss Sable," he said. "Good night, Your Majesty." A rhythm formed over the following days. Each evening, a guard escorted her to the study. Each evening, she sang. Each evening, the king fell asleep. The duration stretched from 1 hour to 2, then 3. His body was learning to trust her voice, surrendering faster each night, holding on to sleep longer. They did not speak much. He worked while she sang, or pretended to work, because she noticed the pen stopping sooner each night. Afterward, he dismissed her with a curt word or a nod. But small things shifted. On the third night, a cushion appeared on her wooden chair. Thick and soft, covered in dark green velvet. She looked at the king. He was reading a dispatch and did not look up. On the fifth night, a pitcher of water appeared on the small table beside her chair. The king turned a page. On the seventh night, the wooden chair was gone entirely. In its place sat a smaller version of his own armchair, upholstered in the same worn leather, positioned close enough to the fire that the warmth reached her. "Thank you for the chair, Your Majesty," Sable said. "What chair?" the king replied, not looking up. Sable bit back a smile. On the 9th night, something changed. She was singing a slow, old hymn she had learned from the kitchen women who raised her after her mother died. A song about ships returning to harbor. The king was in his armchair by the fire, and as she sang, his head tilted back against the leather, his eyes closed. The report slid from his fingers and landed on the floor. In the silence that followed, she heard his breathing go uneven, shallow, and quick. His fingers curled into the armrest. A low sound came from his throat, tight and strained. She crossed the room before she could think about what she was doing. Up close, his face had changed entirely. His jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek, and his brow was drawn down in an expression of raw anguish that made something constrict in her chest. She reached out and touched his hand, and the world vanished. Cold hit her first, a biting, bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with absence. She was standing in a vast, dark space, the ground beneath her feet black glass, smooth and endless, reflecting a sky that held no stars, no moon, nothing but oppressive, suffocating darkness. And the silence. Not the absence of sound, the presence of something that devoured sound, something patient and deliberate and aware. "Thalric!" she called, and her voice came out thin, swallowed almost instantly. She found him 30 feet away, standing motionless, staring into the dark. On his face was an expression she had never seen on any living person: surrender. Something moved in the blackness beyond him, something vast. Sable grabbed his wrist and pulled. The darkness shattered like glass, and she was gasping on the floor of the study, her hand still wrapped around the king's forearm, her heart slamming against her ribs. The king was awake, staring at her, his chest heaving, his pupils blown wide. "What was that place?" Sable whispered. His expression closed like a door slamming shut. "Leave," he said. "But Your Majesty, that place, I was there. I saw." "I said leave." His voice cracked like a whip. She searched his face for some explanation. There was nothing. Just cold, controlled fury she could not tell was aimed at her or at himself. She walked out on shaking legs and stood alone in the dark corridor, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hand still tingling where she had touched him. She pressed her back against the cold stone and tried to make sense of what she had witnessed. That place was not a dream. Dreams did not have weight. Dreams did not have cold that seeped into your marrow like water into cracked stone. Whatever lived behind the king's eyes was real, and it was patient, and it wanted him. She had seen something she was not meant to see. Not his sleeplessness, not his vulnerability. Something worse. Something living in the dark that wanted to consume him. And the most terrifying part was not the thing in the darkness. It was the look on his face when he stood before it. The look of a man who had stopped fighting. 2 days passed. Sable was not summoned. She waited in her quarters the first evening, dressed and ready, her hair pinned back the way she always wore it for the study. The guard never came. She sat on the edge of her bed until the candle burned to a stub, then undressed in the dark and lay staring at the ceiling until morning. The second evening was the same. No guard, no summons, no word from Fenwick or anyone else. The palace carried on as if she did not exist. She was invisible again, just as she had been before she opened her mouth in the great hall, and the familiarity of it should have been comforting. It was not. On the third morning, she found Fenwick in the administrative wing, bent over a ledger. "The king has suspended the arrangement," Fenwick said before she could ask. "He has instructed me to arrange your departure from the palace." "My departure?" "Transport to the northern provinces. A position at a healing monastery as a cantor in their infirmary choir." Fenwick paused. "It is a respectable placement, Miss Sable. You would want for nothing." "Except an explanation," Sable said, her voice harder than she intended. "Why is he sending me away?" Fenwick set down his pen and looked at her. For the first time since she had met him, the composure cracked. He looked tired, worried. "Because the king believes proximity to him has placed you in danger," he said quietly, "and he would rather lose the only remedy for his condition than risk harm to you." "He is going to die," Sable said flatly. Fenwick did not answer, which was answer enough. "How long?" "The court physician estimates 4 months. Perhaps less. An alpha's constitution can endure what would kill an ordinary man, but even he has limits. The sleeplessness is destroying him from the inside." 4 months. The most powerful man in the kingdom had 4 months to live, and he was spending them pushing away the only person who could help. "Since your sessions ceased," Fenwick continued, "his condition has deteriorated sharply, as if your presence had been holding something at bay." He paused, measuring his next words carefully. "And you, Miss Sable. Forgive my observation, but you do not look well either." He was right. Since the arrangement ended, her sleep had fractured into fitful stretches, interrupted by a persistent ache she could not identify. Her appetite had vanished. Her hands trembled when she was not concentrating on keeping them still. And her voice, the one thing that had always been effortless, had gone thin and brittle, as if some essential resonance had been stripped from it. "I am fine," she said. "You are not," Fenwick replied, "and I believe you know why." The silence between them was heavy with implication. She knew what he was suggesting. She had sensed it herself. The pull, the ache, the way the distance between her and Thalric had become a physical thing that pressed against her ribs. But naming it made it real, and real things could be taken away. "The king will not see you willingly," Fenwick said, "but I have arranged for you to attend the council session this afternoon. Councillor Braith requested an additional vocalist for the opening invocation. I volunteered your name. You are going behind his back." "I am serving my king," Fenwick corrected, "even when he makes it exceedingly difficult to do so." The council chamber was vast, a circular room beneath a domed ceiling painted with faded constellations. Sable was positioned with the other musicians near the entrance, half hidden behind a stone column. The sight of Thalric nearly broke her resolve. The hollows beneath his eyes had deepened into dark trenches. His cheekbones stood out sharply, and his movements had the careful quality of someone rationing every ounce of energy. He was dying in plain sight. The invocation began. 3 voices joined in the traditional opening hymn. Sable was the 4th. She kept her voice low at first, blending with the others, but as the hymn progressed, the sound rose from somewhere deeper than her throat, deeper than her lungs, from the place where the ache lived, and it poured out with a force she had never summoned before. The other vocalists faltered. One by one they stopped singing, leaving Sable's voice alone in the domed chamber, rising and echoing off the painted stars. The sound was different now, richer and more powerful than anything she had produced in the study. As if the distance between her and Thalric had compressed something inside her, and now it was expanding with a ferocity that frightened her. Thalric's head snapped up. His eyes found her instantly, and she saw recognition and fury and something desperate flicker across his face in rapid succession. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, his jaw clenched so hard the cord stood out in his neck. He was fighting it with everything he had. He lasted 12 seconds. His eyes closed. His head tipped forward. His breathing deepened, and the Alpha King fell asleep in front of his entire council. 30 counselors stared. 2 guards reached for their weapons. Fenwick raised one hand in a gesture so calm and authoritative that the room froze. "The session will reconvene this afternoon," Fenwick announced. "Please vacate the chamber." When the room had emptied, Sable asked, "How long since he last slept?" Fenwick's composure slipped. 6 days. 6 days. He had been awake for 6 full days rather than let her near him again. "He will kill himself before he asks for help," Sable said. "Yes," Fenwick agreed. "He will." She watched the king sleep in his chair, his face soft and unguarded, his breathing deep and even for the first time in almost a week. Something cracked open inside her at the sight of it, some protective wall she had built around the growing ache, and for the first time she admitted to herself what she had been trying not to name. She could leave, take the placement at the monastery, sing hymns in a cold stone infirmary for the rest of her life, and let the Alpha King destroy himself on his own terms. It was the rational choice, the safe choice. But Sable had spent her entire life being safe, being small, being invisible. And look where it had gotten her. Rejected, discarded, invisible to everyone except a dying man who was too stubborn to let her save him. "I need to speak with the court physician," she said to Fenwick. "And then I need you to get me into the king's chambers tonight." Fenwick studied her for a long moment. "That can be arranged," he said. The court physician was a compact, sharp-eyed woman named Orienne, who kept her examination room colder than a crypt. Pulse elevated, skin pallid, tremor in the hands. Orienne said, before Sable had even sat down, "How long since you last slept properly?" 5 days. "And the chest pain?" "How did you know about the chest pain?" "Because the king has the same symptom." Orienne pulled a leather-bound journal from her shelf. "Do you know what a resonance bond is?" Sable's heart stuttered. "I have heard the term. Exceedingly rare. 1 in perhaps 10,000 pairings. The bond forms through a fundamental harmonic compatibility between 2 wolves. The old texts describe it as 2 instruments tuned to the same frequency. When one vibrates, the other responds. When they are separated, the dissonance causes physical deterioration in both parties." "Both," Sable repeated. Both. The king came to me 3 days ago with symptoms I could not explain. Chest pain with no cardiac cause, a persistent auditory phenomenon he described as silence that has weight. I could not identify the cause until I found elevated bonding markers in his blood work. the kind that only appear when a resonance bond has begun forming and been interrupted. What did he say? He ordered me to find a way to sever it. The words hit like a fist. Can you? No. That is rather the point of the word bond. It can be completed or it can be ignored, but it cannot be undone, and ignoring it carries consequences. The deterioration becomes irreversible. She held Sable's gaze. In both of you. He is trying to protect me, Sable said, from the dark place. Your voice breaks through the curse because the resonance bond gives your sound a frequency the curse cannot override. You are, quite literally, the only thing louder than the thing that is killing him. Then why is he pushing me away? Because the last time someone got close to him, they died. Who? Sable whispered. That is not my story to tell, Orion said. Ask the king, if he will let you close enough to hear the answer. That night, a key appeared beneath Sable's door at sunset. Iron and heavy, with a leather cord threaded through the bow. No note, no instructions. She did not need them. The corridors of the upper palace were empty at this hour. Sable's bare feet made no sound on the stone as she climbed the stairs to the king's chambers. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened without a sound. The room was dark. The fire had burned down to embers, casting everything in shades of deep amber and shadow. And on the bed, still fully clothed, boots and all, lay Thalric. He was not asleep. His eyes were open, staring at the canopy above him, and the expression on his face was the loneliest thing Sable had ever seen. His head turned. When he saw her in the doorway, something raw and uncontrolled moved across his features before he could stop it. Relief. Desperate, aching relief. Then it was gone. I gave orders that you were not to be admitted. I know. Fenwick? Fenwick. He exhaled. I will have him reassigned to a post so remote he will need a map to find the sun. You will not, Sable said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Because he is the only person in this palace brave enough to disobey you when you are being foolish. Thalric sat up slowly. The movement cost him. She could see it in the way his arms trembled slightly, the way he pressed his jaw tight against the effort. He was deteriorating faster than she had realized. You should not be here, he said. You should not be dying, she replied. And yet, here we are. His eyes met hers across the dark room. The embers painted him in shades of copper and shadow, carving the bones of his face into sharp relief, deepening the bruised skin beneath his eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed. I saw Orion today. She told me about the bond. Something shifted in his expression, pain quickly controlled. Then she told you what I asked her to do. Yes. She also told you it was impossible. I am aware. Then tell me what happened to you, Sable said, because everyone in this palace has a piece of the story except me, and I am the one with my life tied to yours. He stared at her for a long time. She could see the war behind his eyes, the need to keep her out fighting against the need to let her in. Sit down, he said at last. There was a woman. Her name was Neve. She was a healer in the border villages during the Ashenmoor campaign. She had a gift, not like yours, nothing with sound, but she could ease pain through touch. She would lay her hands on the wounded and the agony would drain from their faces like water running downhill. His voice had gone distant, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. I cared for her. She cared for me. And when the siege of Ashenmoor broke, the warlord Draven Kale did not target my soldiers. He targeted her. Sable's stomach dropped. Draven's witch, a woman named Sereth, built the curse. She killed Neve first, made me watch, and then she bound the darkness to my sleep. Every night the curse pulls me into the same place, and every night I see Neve's face in the dark. His voice cracked. He caught it, forced it steady. Everyone I let close to me becomes a target. Neve died because she was near me, because I was selfish enough to want her there. He looked at Sable. I will not make that mistake again. Sable reached across and took his hand. His fingers were cold. They trembled against hers. I am not Neve, she said quietly, and you are not the man who could not save her. Not anymore. Sing, he whispered. Please. Sable sang, the old lullaby that they both somehow knew. His eyes closed. Within minutes his breathing had deepened into something slow and steady and peaceful. She did not leave. She sat beside him, his hand in hers, and sang until her voice was raw and the fire had burned to ash. And when she finally stopped, he did not wake. He slept on, his face smooth, his body still. She should have been afraid. Of the curse. Of the vast thing waiting for him in the dark. But sitting there in the silence, holding his hand while he slept, the only thing she felt was certainty. Absolute, terrifying, unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was still holding his hand when dawn crept through the curtains. And when his eyes opened, slow and confused, and found her face, something broke open behind them. Something he had been holding shut for a very long time. You stayed, he said. I stayed. He pulled her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles. It was not a kiss. It was a surrender. The days that followed were a negotiation conducted in silences and small concessions. Thalric did not send her away again. He simply stopped fighting. Each evening, Sable came to his chambers. Each evening, she sang. Each evening, he slept. But the rules had shifted. On the first night after she returned, her chair was positioned beside the bed. On the second night, it was gone entirely, replaced by a space on the mattress, a second pillow, a folded blanket. Orien's recommendation, Thalric said without looking up from a military report. Proximity strengthens the bond's protective properties. It is a medical decision. Entirely clinical, Sable agreed. Of course. She climbed onto the bed. The mattress dipped under her weight, and the scent of him surrounded her completely, soaking into her skin with every breath. She lay on her back, rigid as a plank. You are very stiff, Thalric observed. I am trying to maintain appropriate boundaries. A pause. Then, so quiet she almost missed it, he laughed. A low huff of air that barely qualified as sound, but it moved through her like sunlight through water. She sang softly, and he fell asleep within minutes. At some point her own eyes closed. She woke to find his arm around her waist, her back pressed against his chest. His heartbeat steady against her shoulder blade, his face tucked against the curve of her neck. Her wolf, quiet and cautious her entire life, stirred with a ferocity that stole her breath. She held perfectly still. Then she felt him wake. The subtle tension in his arm, the hitch in his breathing. For one suspended moment neither of them moved. Then he pulled her closer. Not a conscious decision. His body responded to hers the way a compass responds to north. Then he was gone. He released her so abruptly the cold air hit her like a slap. The door to his dressing chamber opened and closed with controlled force. When he emerged, fully clothed and armored in self-control, he said to the wall, "That was an error in judgment." "It did not feel like an error," Sable said. His head turned sharply. For one unguarded second she saw the want in his expression, devastating and undeniable. Then it vanished. But it kept happening. On the fourth night she woke to find his hand tangled in her hair. On the sixth night, his lips brushed her shoulder in sleep. On the eighth night, he pulled her close again and held on for 3 aching seconds before retreating. It was Orien who shattered the careful fiction. During a weekly assessment, the physician set down her pen and said, "The bond wants to complete itself. Incomplete bonds of this magnitude are not stable. They either seal or they collapse. What happens if it collapses? Acute psychological fracture, possible cardiac failure, permanent severing of the wolf from the human consciousness. She let that settle. In both of you. Has anyone told the king? He is known for 9 days. 9 days of sleeping beside her, of waking tangled together, of retreating behind composure each morning. 9 days of knowing their connection would destroy them both if left incomplete, and choosing silence. Where is he right now? The North Terrace. She found him at the stone balustrade overlooking the valley. The evening sky was the color of bruised fruit, deep purple bleeding into black at the edges, and the first stars were appearing above the distant mountains. He heard her coming. She saw his shoulders tighten, his hands grip the stone. Orion told me everything, Sable said, stopping 3 paces behind him. About the bond, about what happens if we do not complete it, about the fact that you have known for 9 days and said nothing. He did not turn around. She should not have told you. No. You should have told me. Her voice shook with the effort of keeping it level. You have been lying beside me every night, knowing we are both being torn apart, and you said nothing. Because you think you are protecting me. Because you think if you just suffer quietly enough, somehow it will save me. If the bond collapses, you survive, he said, his voice low. You lose your wolf, perhaps, but you survive. If the bond completes, and the curse takes me, you die with me. That is not your decision to make, Sable said. He turned then. The dying light caught his face, and she could see the cost of the last 9 days written in every line and shadow. Gaunt, exhausted, resigned. I have already lost 1 person to this, he said. Neve died because of me, because I let her close, because I wanted her warmth more than I wanted her safety. I will not do that to you. I am not a woman you need to protect from your curse, Sable said, closing the distance between them until she could feel his breath on her face. I am the woman who can break it, but only if you let me. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was the kiss of 2 people who had been circling each other across weeks of silence and sleepless nights, and when it broke, neither of them pulled away. The bond ignited. His emotions crashed into her, relief and terror and grief, and a love so fierce it nearly brought her to her knees. Are you sure? He breathed. Sable answered by pulling his mouth back to hers. He carried her inside, and the door closed behind them, and for a while there was nothing in the world but the 2 of them. The bond completed with a resonant hum that settled into her bones and stayed there. She felt him, not just his presence but him, his mind, his heart, his grief, his hope, everything he was, pouring into her like light through an open door. The mating bond sealed with a finality that felt like coming home. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. She could sense it now, a steady second pulse alongside her own. His fingers traced slow circles on her shoulder, and neither of them spoke for a long time. I have you, Sable murmured. I know, he said, and his voice was wrecked and grateful and full. He fell asleep in her arms, and she watched him, and felt a joy so immense it ached. She closed her eyes, and she woke in the dark. The dark was absolute. The ground beneath her feet was black glass, smooth and cold, and the silence had a texture, thick and suffocating and aware. But something was different. She could feel Thalric through the completed bond, a thread of light in the black, pulling taut between them. She followed it. She found him on his knees. Nothing held him down. But the weight on his shoulders was visible, a crushing, invisible pressure that had driven him to the ground and kept him there. Surrounding him, arranged in a vast circle, stood hundreds of figures. Translucent, not quite solid, Men and women and children, soldiers in torn uniforms and civilians in blood-stained clothing. They stood motionless, watching the king with eyes that held no accusation and no mercy. Just patience, the terrible patience of the dead. Through their sealed connection, his guilt crashed into her so hard it nearly buckled her knees. Every life lost in the Ashenmoor campaign. Every soldier who followed his orders into death. He carried them all, and the curse fed on it. She understood now. The dark place was not a prison built from the outside, it was constructed from within. The curse had taken the guilt he already carried and built walls from it. The witch Serath had not needed to create the darkness. She had only needed to lock the door on the darkness Thalric had built himself. A woman stood apart from the dead. Young, gentle eyes, dark hair. A wound in her chest, bloodless and permanent, and in her hands a strip of white cloth. Neve. He will stay here, the ghost said. Her voice was soft, patient. He chose to. He always chooses to. Every night he agrees with what we tell him. That he failed. That the blood is on his hands. The ghost was not lying. The curse worked because Thalric believed it should. What makes you think you can reach him? The ghost asked. I tried. I loved him. And I died anyway. The answer came to Sable with a clarity that almost made her laugh. Because I am not trying to save him, she said. I am trying to help him save himself. She walked toward Thalric. The dead parted for her. She knelt on the black glass and took his face in her hands. His skin was cold. His eyes were open but vacant. She sang. The first note cracked the silence like a stone through ice. The lullaby, their lullaby, the one her mother had sung and his mother had sung, rang out clear and impossibly loud, resonating off the glass and echoing through the empty sky. The dead flinched. Several of them flickered. The completed bond amplified her voice, carrying it deeper into him. Past the guilt, past the grief, past years of self-inflicted punishment. His eyes focused. He saw her. Sable? I am here, and I need you to listen. She held his face, weaving the melody through her words. You fought a war you did not start to protect people who could not protect themselves. You made decisions no one should ever have to make, and some of those decisions ended in death. That is the truth. But this? She gestured at the dark expanse, the glass floor, the silent army. This is not justice. This is self-destruction, and you do not get to destroy yourself and call it penance. Not anymore. Not when your destruction destroys me too. Neve died, Sable continued, tears burning in her eyes. And you could not save her. And that will never stop hurting. But she would not want this for you. You know she would not. She looked at the ghost. Neve's expression had changed. The manufactured patience of the curse had softened into something real. Genuine sorrow. Not the weapon the curse had made of her memory, but the grief of a woman watching someone she loved being consumed by guilt she could not lift from him. I was left on the castle steps after my mother died, Sable said, the words coming raw and unbidden. Nobody claimed me, nobody wanted me, and for years I believed I deserved it. That if I had been worth something, someone would have kept me. I built my own prison from that belief, just like you built yours. She looked back at Thalric. I deserve to heal from that, and so do you, and so do they. Let them go, Sable whispered. Let her go. You are allowed to grieve and still choose to live. His hand came up and covered hers. His fingers were trembling. I am sorry, he said to the ghosts, to Neve, to all of them. I am sorry I could not do more. Grief poured out of him in a torrent so powerful it nearly swept her away. He wept. The Alpha King, the warlord, wept on his knees in the dark with Sable's hands on his face. Neve's ghost smiled. Small and sad and real. Then she closed her eyes and dissolved into light. One by one, the dead followed. Their forms brightened, flickered, vanished like candle flames extinguished by a gentle breath. The darkness thinned, the glass floor cracked, and through the fractures, light poured upward, warm and golden. The silence broke. Sound rushed back in, the crackle of a fire, the whisper of wind, the double heartbeat of two bonded wolves. The dark place shattered around them. She was in his chambers, in his bed, in his arms. Thalric was awake, staring at her with an expression so full of wonder and grief and gratitude that she could not look at it without crying. "You followed me in," he said. "Of course I did." "You sang to the dead." "Someone had to." He pulled her against his chest so tightly she could barely breathe, and she wrapped her arms around him and held on. His body shook with the aftershocks of grief finally released, and she pressed her face into his neck and let her own tears fall. Through their completed connection, she sensed something she had never sensed from him before. Not relief, not gratitude, peace. Fragile and tentative and new, like the first green shoot pushing through scorched earth. But there. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "You are welcome, you impossible man." He laughed, broken and wet and beautiful. The curse did not shatter cleanly. Sable had hoped it would. She had imagined a single, decisive break, the chains falling away, the darkness dissolving, Thalric waking each morning whole and restored. But curses built from guilt do not work that way. They leave roots. He still dreamed of the dark place. Not every night, but often enough that the first weeks after the breaking were difficult in ways she had not anticipated. He would jolt awake at odd hours, breathing ragged, his hands reaching for her in the dark. She was always there. She held him, sang softly against his temple, and waited for his heartbeat to settle back into the rhythm she had memorized. Some nights he talked, not about battles or strategy, but about people. The soldier who had shown him a charcoal sketch of his daughter the morning before, a charge that killed half the regiment. The village healer who stayed behind during an evacuation to tend the wounded and never came out. Neve. Always, Neve. The memory of white cloth and a wound that would never close. Sable listened. She did not try to fix it or reframe it or minimize it. She held his hand and let him speak the names out loud, and slowly, painfully slowly, the names lost their sharp edges. "You do not have to carry them alone," she told him one night. "That is what the bond is for." "I thought the bond was a medical arrangement," he murmured against her hair. "Entirely clinical," she agreed. He laughed softly, and she felt the warmth of it hum through their connection like a plucked string. The cord adjusted with the reluctant inevitability of a tide coming in. A rejected bride turned mate to the Alpha King was not what anyone had scripted, and the whispers followed Sable through every corridor. She heard them. The foundling. The cast-off. The woman Prince Cedrin threw away like spoiled grain. She pretended they did not sting. Thalric, however, did not pretend. The first nobleman who made a comment within earshot found himself reassigned to a border garrison so remote it did not appear on most maps. The second lost his council seat entirely. There was no announcement, no public reprimand. The offenders simply vanished from court life with the quiet efficiency of someone who had commanded armies and knew exactly how to make a point without raising his voice. "You cannot exile everyone who says something unkind about me," Sable told him. "I can," he replied calmly. "Watch me. Thalric. I have room in the northern provinces. Several outposts are critically understaffed." She tried to look stern. She failed. Cedrin returned to court once. It was unavoidable. A diplomatic obligation tied to the Western Reaches alliance that Thalric had rebuilt on different terms. Sable saw her former betrothed across the Great Hall during a state reception, and for one sharp, disorienting moment, The old wound flared. The memory of being presented like livestock. The 3 words that had unmade her. Send her back. Cedrin met her gaze across the room. She expected contempt, or perhaps smug satisfaction. Instead, she saw something she had not anticipated. Regret. He looked away first. That night, lying in the dark with Thalric's arm draped across her waist, she told him about it. About the look on Cedrin's face and the strange, empty ache it had left behind. He gave you away, Thalric said quietly. That was the single greatest mistake of his life, and he knows it. You rejected me first, Sable pointed out. The silence that followed was thick with guilt she could sense rippling off him. She turned to face him. I was not looking for an apology. I was making a point. You rejected me, and it was the worst moment of my life. But if you had not, I would never have sung in the Great Hall. And you would never have heard me. And you would be dead. He was quiet for a long moment. Then his hand found her face in the dark, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The worst decision I ever made, he said, led me to the best thing that ever happened to me. Sable kissed his palm. Do not get sentimental. It does not suit you. It suits me perfectly. I am a deeply sentimental man. You exiled a baron to the frozen north for coughing too loudly during my singing. He was being disruptive. She laughed, and the sound filled the dark room, and through their connection she felt his heart swell in response. Months passed. The nightmares grew quieter. Some nights Thalric slept through until dawn without stirring, and those mornings he woke slowly, blinking in the pale light, and looked at her with an expression of such bewildered gratitude that it made her ache every single time. Good morning, she would say. Good morning, he would answer, and the words carried the weight of a man who had spent a year believing he would never see another one. Sable still sang to him, not because he needed it the way he once had, but because it had become theirs. A ritual. A language spoken between 2 people who had found each other in the dark and refused to let go. She sang the melody that had become theirs, the ancient Borderlands song that had crossed 2 bloodlines and 2 lifetimes to bring them together, and each time the notes settled over them like a blanket pulled close. One evening, as she finished the final verse, she heard something she had never heard before. A second voice, low and rough and slightly off-key, humming the melody a half-beat behind her. She turned. Thalric was looking at her from across the room, and on his face was the smallest, most private smile she had ever seen. You are singing, she whispered, astonished. Do not make it a thing, he said. You are singing our song. Badly. Beautifully. Her eyes stung with tears she did not try to hide. You are singing. He crossed the room, took her face in his hands, and kissed her forehead. You gave me my voice back, he said quietly. It seems only fair. Sable woke to pale morning light and birdsong through the open window. Thalric was still asleep beside her, one arm curled around her waist, his face pressed into the pillow with the graceless abandon of a man who had finally learned how to rest. His breathing was deep and even, no tension in his jaw, no clenched fists, no nightmares pulling him under. She watched him for a moment, the way the light caught the silver threads beginning to show at his temples, the faint scar below his ear, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Through their bond, she felt the quiet hum of a man at peace. Outside, the palace was stirring. She could hear the distant clatter of the kitchens, the murmur of guards changing shift, the ordinary sounds of a kingdom carrying on. Somewhere in the East Gallery, Fenwick would be reviewing the morning dispatches with the precision of a man who had never allowed a single detail to escape his attention. Somewhere in the infirmary wing, Oriane would be cataloging her instruments and pretending she was not deeply satisfied with how things had turned out. Sable settled back against his shoulder, closed her eyes, and let sleep pull her under one more time. And for the first time in a very long while, the dark did not follow.